So excited. I have Euny Hong with me today. She's the author of The Power of Nunchi. Euny, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I feel like there's this craze lately where all of these Asian concepts like ikigai
Right.
and I don't know what I forgot what Marie Kondo calls her stuff. She,
KonMari method, I think
oh
that,
yeah, the
yeah.
Marie, but that's related to her
Oh, I
name.
see.
But there's all these
Right.
like concepts that are being brought here, and Marie Kondo is kind of about minimalism. Ikigai is about this kind of incremental improvements in your life, and so Nunchi is I'll try to define it and feel free to correct me. Nunchi is basically this enhanced emotional intelligence where you're not only kind of internally emotionally intelligent, like in terms of how you deal with situations, but you become extra sensitive when you're in a new situation, how you analyze it, how you analyze the people in the room, how you
Right.
analyze the room itself, and how you then use your emotional intelligence to deal with what you're learning and observing on the fly in real time.
Yes.
And so would you say that's the difference? Like maybe there's more nuances to what's the differences between Nunchi and just really good emotional intelligence?
Right. I mean, I would say Nunchi is a subset of emotional intelligence, but there are two things that make it Nunchi and not just emotional intelligence or somebody having a high EQ. Nunchi emphasizes speed. So in Korea, for example, if somebody is very skilled at Nunchi, they don't say that person has great Nunchi. They say that person has quick Nunchi, because adaptability and real-time analysis is considered really important. Realizing later that you should have said or done something is good as a life lesson, but it doesn't help you from the situation that you're in now. And, life lessons can be incredibly frustrating. And the second thing, aside from speed, that makes Nunchi different from regular emotional intelligence is the focus on the room as a whole rather than the person in front of you. Um, and the idea that rooms have emotions and atmospheres and almost their own feelings, and that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Or I didn't say that right. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, rather.
Right, which is I think is
Right.
emotional intelligence doesn't like just the standard like I almost see emotional intelligence as a subset of Nunchi
Uh-huh.
because it doesn't
I see.
address the context of the room, the physical space. So
Right.
emotional intelligence, it seems to me, I think by the way, I think emotional intelligence is not acknowledged as a real intelligence by many,
Right.
psychologists and so on. But in the general ways I hear about emotional intelligence, it's just about whether you know how to deal with complicated interpersonal situations. It doesn't really address what's the physical context I'm in the way you say Nunchi does. So,
Right.
like, what's an example where the physical context it changes things as opposed to just interpersonal relations?
Sure. So, when you go into an office or something, every day you're actually kind of entering a different office. And what I recommend to people is the first thing that you do when you go into a meeting is instead of making a joke or there's some people who just compulsively make jokes every time they enter a room, and if you think about it, you know exactly the kind of person I'm talking about. And it is
Me.
a
That's what
weakness.
I do, by the way.
Yes, and look how you turned out.
I
No.
know. Thrice divorced. No, twice. Sorry.
No, I mean, it depends on the situation, but you're putting yourself at a disadvantage that you don't need to be in. You can obviously succeed without Nunchi, but not as well as if you had it. Because the higher up people are, the more they think they can afford to forget their Nunchi, and that's when they start to lose things. Elon Musk being an example of somebody who clearly had Nunchi awareness at some point in his career and then kind of got too arrogant to stay connected to his product and his people, and, that's a Nunchi loss, and you can succeed without Nunchi, but only up to a point.
I wanna get back to
Yeah,
the Elon
yeah.
Musk example, but then I also wanna,
Uh-huh.
first off, by the way, what's that sound you think?
I was wondering that also.
Oh, okay, so it'll just
It's
happen.
it's just elves,
Yeah,
yeah,
the New York
complaining.
City
Yeah.
elves that bang on every
Yes.
heater.
Yeah,
We don't need to edit this out, by the way, I like having this stuff in. But, uh,
uh
Nunchi
Right.
itself, I've seen it described as if you have quick nunchi, as you
Right.
call it, is described as a almost like a superpower
Yeah.
because you get into a
Mhm.
situation and reading in between the lines, you
Right.
can do things as you mentioned earlier, that you won't regret later. Like you
Yeah.
won't say, "Oh, I should have said this." You'll know immediately what to
Right.
say and do to maximize the potential of a situation for yourself and perhaps for everybody in the situation. You also mentioned
Right.
that having good nunchi sort of is contagious. It gives good nunchi to the people around you as well. But on the Elon Musk
Uh-huh.
example, that's an interesting one because I feel to be a successful businessman, meaning to sell a product,
Mhm.
to sell your idea to investors, to sell your company requires extreme nunchi skills. Like
Yes.
no one wakes up in the morning and says, "I can't wait to give this person hundreds of millions of dollars so they can be fabulously wealthy for the
Right.
rest of their lives." You have to use extraordinary nunchi to
Yes.
show that that this is in their agenda as well. And and then you mentioned Elon Musk. He had this one period where he's tweeting, "Oh, Tesla's going to get bought." He tweeted he's on a trial right now. He tweeted that pedo quote.
Right.
He was on the podcast where he was smoking some pot,
Yeah.
which was against SEC regulations. So no matter what you feel about marijuana laws, and I'm in favor of legalizing, that scene in particular cost him money. And I wonder if that's a situation too where life, maybe he obviously had good nunchi
Yeah.
in general, but at that time I remember he was having some relationship issues. Maybe something can happen in your life that throws you off.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to whether he was having a bad couple of years, but what does seem to happen in general, and again, I'm not speaking about him in particular,
No, let's
is
trash him.
right.
Elon, are you
I
listening?
have
Come on the
I
podcast
own
to
no
confront this.
shares in Tesla or any, but no, I mean, let's just maybe it would help to have a counterpoint to Elon Musk, which would be Steve Jobs is somebody who had the Nunchi and never lost the Nunchi. And we lost him very young, so maybe he would eventually have gone the Musk way, but there's no evidence of that. At the beginning of their careers, I would say Jobs and Musk had similar Nunchi levels and were known for similar things, which is uh, sort of they understood what the consumer wanted, which is a big picture reading the room skill. Nunchi isn't just about like, I'm walking in here and people, do they seem nervous? Have they just found out about a family death? Or, is the atmosphere light or heavy? That's sort of a small scale Nunchi. A big scale Nunchi is running a company or a country, right? And Steve Jobs was famous for literal, Nunchi means eye measuring, measuring
EYE.
EYE, not the pronoun. And Jobs was famous for literally just staring down people, in a way that made them feel, well, A, seen, but also B, kind of intimidated, I guess. But I don't think it was just posturing to intimidate people. I think he was actually trying to read
Mm.
people, like, sort of scan them. And everything that Jobs did for Apple, that is now considered a triumph that everyone thought was stupid at the time. They were all Nunchi moves, like the design of the iPod. He said people should be able to access a song in no more than 3 clicks. That's a direct connection to the user. Anything that's, user-oriented design, that's all Nunchi stuff. Um,
So
yeah.
it's like he put himself in
Yeah,
the shoes of the average
right,
user and knew what they wanted because there was already MP4 player,
right.
MP3 players, and maybe they were a little bit more complicated. He was just like, "Ugh, no, it doesn't feel right. I
Yeah.
need to just boom, boom, boom," and I'm playing my favorite song from my childhood or whatever.
Right, right. I mean, Jobs is actually a really good example of how somebody who seems quote unquote bad with people or who seems like he might not be emotionally intelligent actually does have really good nunchi. I mean, nunchi doesn't mean that you have to really be liked or specifically pleasant or even really get along with people. You can be as abrasive as you want and have good nunchi too. It's not about making people feel nice and fuzzy. It's about making them feel seen and connected to and understood. And that's why, that's what made Steve Jobs Jobs.
Right, so in that
Right.
case, I mean, he recreated the music industry,
Right.
the movie industry, the phone industry, the
Mhm.
computer industry, and you're saying
Yes.
it's because of this understanding of Nunchi that
Yeah.
in hindsight seems obvious. Oh yeah, let's have a nice design and 3
Right.
clicks, but nobody was doing it. In
Right.
hindsight, the Macintosh
Mhm.
is old news, but nobody was doing the exact kind of nuances that he was doing.
Right.
What's another example of person to person Nunchi where you see it as a superpower, where like the average person doesn't have this, but you've seen an example of superpower, like ninja Nunchi, as you call it.
Well, sure. I mean, in any ordinary office, if you just think whenever I talk about nunchi, I say, "You know what I'm talking about it if you just sit and think about people in your life who have it and who don't have it, and then it becomes immediately clear." And in any office, there are people with good nunchi and bad nunchi. And people with good nunchi are the ones who may or may not be more talented than other people or more skilled, but they have something, and it's not really charm. That doesn't get you very far in the long run. It's just more like they're able to pick they have the best timing, right? They might have this when you're asking for a raise and all these there are things that are within your control. There are things that are not within your control. And Nunchi is about what's in your control, and that is having the best timing. And so people who seem to always get what they want when somebody else asked exactly the same thing, that's usually somebody with good nunchi. Or even like on a micro level, let's say you have two people, they both have young kids, and one always gets in trouble for going to their kids' plays, and the other one always does the same thing and somehow never gets in trouble. And people ask, "Oh, how was it? Do you have pictures?" And you're like, "Same situation. Why is the reception so different?" And very frequently it's a nunchi thing. It's the moment they chose to ask, it's who they asked, and it's not even that they're people just assume that there's brown nosing going on, and it's not about being nicer necessarily, because again, that will get you individual favors, but not long-term success. Uh
And I think being nicer in the workplace is sometimes people, if you don't do it right, people can see
mhm,
through it.
mhm,
So people will almost look down on you
mhm,
as weak.
mhm.
Not weak in such a Machiavellian way, but they know it's not real. They could sense it,
Sure.
and it backfires on you.
Right, right. I mean, and Nunchi is it's not about like, brown nosing or gland handling, it's finding the right time to strike. And that's the part that people sort of almost recoil at when I talk about Nunchi is there is a very pragmatic aspect to it. It's not all about making people feel good, and I mean, there's a Dale Carnegie, the win friends and influence people aspect, but there's also a very strong Machiavellian sort of warrior aspect to it. Uh,
Yeah, no, and the way you describe it,
yeah.
I'm sorry I keep interrupting because you're saying fascinating stuff, but I'm just really curious. Like you describe some of the basic aspects is you walk into a room,
Mhm.
and I find it fascinating the way you put it. Like, be aware that everybody in this room has been here longer than you.
Right,
So all of the kind of energies and interactions they've already happened in this room by the
right,
time you've walked in.
exactly.
And so you have to take almost like a quick mental step back and sort of figure out, even if you know everybody, even if they're all friends, even
Right.
if you've had great personal interactions with everybody, you just have to kind of sense what is the entity of this room now, as if it was a single entity, and then you react to that instead of reacting person to person.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's in Korean there's a word punwigi which means atmosphere, but it's more than an atmosphere. It's like the room's mood, as if the room were a person, like uh like this room is like a jolly black giant with lots of city graffiti or something, and the mood it was very hip, and we're all working, so everyone is hopefully the right balance of happy and tense and relaxed, and like there's a perfect storm of but like if you're in a social situation and you walk into a room, you have to, as the Bible says, read the writing on the wall. um
Does the Bible actually say that?
I don't know.
All right, we'll take your word for it.
um, and somebody's some maybe I mean but something about yeah, yeah, but, seeing things when you walk into a room, if you don't pause to look, it's almost like imagine you're walking into a room where there's an exam and people are actually showing you the answers and you're not paying attention. Being in a walking to a room where there are already people there is like walking to a room where people are showing you answers to an exam that's already ongoing. You can gather information as long as you just kind of realize that it's there. Don't immediately make a joke and don't assume. And plenty of people walk into a meeting and they say, Oh god, is this one of those stupid meetings that George called that could have been handled in an email? And they didn't even bother looking to see whether George was there or not, right? And there are people who do this all I mean, I do it sometimes, everybody does it sometimes, but there are people who do it all the time, and there are people who never do it. It's just all a question not even just of magical skill or perception, it's just the magic is in learning how to be quiet and pay attention to the writing on the wall or the fact that people are showing you answers to the metaphorical exam.
So where's an
So
example where you've felt that you've used
mhm,
quick nunchi. By the way, I like how you describe it as quick versus that great
yeah,
because it's like you said earlier again, you don't want to regret later.
yeah,
Oh, I should have said this. Having quick nunchi allows you to say the right thing at the right time rather than
right,
regret later. But what's an example where you've
right,
used this superpower? I mean, you wrote the book, so
right,
and you feel like the results would have been different than prior times where you didn't use Nunchi.
right, well, so one example I could think of is a long time ago, there was an office that I worked at that this was during the previous recession, um, and everyone kind of knew that there were probably gonna be layoffs. And, for some reason, it occurred to me I was waiting for the elevator, and I noticed that there was a sign that's always there saying, "In the event of fire, but please use the stairs. This is the name of the local fire department, and these 3 people are the volunteers in your office who are, deputized as fire marshals." It doesn't mean they had to put out fires, it just meant they agreed to go into the toilets and say, "There's a fire, everyone get out." And for some reason, I had this epiphany that those 3 people were gonna be among the ones getting fired, and to me, it was sort of like a joke because it was like a play on words of like, "The fire marshals are going to get fired," so everyone I told that to thought I was kidding, but I was actually not kidding. I said, "I don't know why, I just think that they're gonna get fired," and it has something to do with the fact that they all volunteered to do it. They're very, rah-rah, but that was part of the problem. It was sort of like in that particular office, those were not the values of the office
How did you know?
because it was entirely based on spreadsheets and,
So
yeah,
an employee taking initiative like, "Okay, I'm, invested in this company," meaning, emotionally
right,
invested in this company. I wanna be part of the community, so I'm gonna be the fire marshal. I'm gonna take extra,
right.
duties. That was not valued.
That was
And
a misread. That was a misread, and I think it was an overcompensation. It would be like if somebody said, "I'm gonna make my mark on this," I'm going to join the party committee." I mean, in some offices that I've worked, that would absolutely be a way to wield social and political powers to join the party committee. And in other offices, no. I mean, if you're working for Steve Jobs, probably no.
right.
You know, and
And how did you
yeah.
pick up on these nuances?
To me, they were obvious.
Mhm.
It was just sort of like, if there are a lot of people who sort of do things from computer and FaceTime isn't considered important, and any kind of sort of amateur people dress down a lot, and there are a lot of telecommuters and so forth. It tends to be very numbers oriented. If you read the weekly CEO report, which everyone would just delete because it's boring, they'll actually tell you what their values are. You know, um, and, to me, it was obvious that it was a very bottom line oriented company and that people who did things that in high school would have made them popular actually made them lose respect in this particular
And
case.
I remember
Yeah.
you write about this in the book. So those fire marshals actually did end up getting
Mhm.
laid off, and when they went around and asked for new volunteers for fire marshals,
Yeah.
you specifically did not
I said
volunteer.
no, and they said, "They thought I was kidding." I said, "No, no, I really, if there's a fire, the first thing I will save is this keyboard and this mug, and
So
nobody else." Yeah.
that's using Nunchi though to save the property of the work as opposed to the people.
No, so I didn't wa and then so they picked 3 more people and for the volunteer fire marshal, 2 of the 3 people also got fired, and this all happened within months of each other, so it was bad Nunchi to volunteer, it was bad Nunchi to not notice what the people who got fired had in common, you know, and I'm not saying, "Wow, I'm so smart," I'm just saying, actually, it was all there, um, and, it was just a question of paying attention to the signals that everyone was already giving every day, because everyone knows, "Oh, well, if my boss is in a good mood today, then I can ask for a raise." But Nunchi, again, doesn't just mean that individual that day. It's a global thing. It means, yeah, your boss might be in a good mood, but didn't you just go to this meeting where, there was a graph and the graph was going down, just sloping downward? It doesn't matter if the boss is in a good mood, you're not reading the overall atmosphere of the company,
Also, the
right?
boss being in a good mood might be a negative sign because
Yes,
he's not gonna show,
right.
you know, overtly that he's in a bad mood right before he fires people. He's
Right,
gonna keep everyone calm, and
right.
then I just think that would be the normal tendency of most bosses, I don't know. But
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the number one reason that people need Nunchi is that, you know, if I tell you, oh, 80% of communication is nonverbal, you're going to roll your eyes most likely because we've all heard it and it just seems really stupid. And, what are we supposed to do about it? But I mean, you see this at work every day, and I mean, at work figuratively, and also in the office every day, where nobody is saying what they're thinking. So of course, it's 80% nonverbal.
well, I have kind of proof of it, which is that the podcasts I do, and I do all the podcasts
Hmm.
in person, like we're doing right
Hmm.
now. But when I used to do podcasts, let's say over the phone, this is years ago,
Uh-huh.
those podcasts got significantly less downloads than the ones in person.
Yeah.
I happen to have done one the first year or second year in
Right.
person, and that had spiked the number of downloads because it was more shared by
Yeah.
people. So it's clearly like in person, there was more communication that was happening and led to a better discussion and it was more entertaining, more educational, and so on. So people shared it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of proof that more was happening non-verbally than people suspect.
Sure.
But like so let me ask you like and then I want to go through your rules of Nunchi, which
Uh-huh.
were fascinating. But like let me just ask you some random situations. Like let's say it's Thanksgiving. We just passed
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, and you walk into a room of family,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly you sense slight discomfort, like maybe they were just talking about you. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Is where does Nunchi play a role in here? Like how do you trust your observations? What do you look for? What do you do next? And so on. Because that's maybe a common situation in my life, so I want to know.
Right. Well, I mean, first I would say if it's everyone's right to avoid a situation where they have to use so much nunchi that it gives them a migraine. Like if a situation is going to require tons and tons of nunchi and it can be avoided, I always say it's okay to avoid it. But in a situation,
So that
yeah,
I'm sorry, that's
yeah,
interesting. So
yeah,
Nunchi in general becomes a superpower when the stakes are higher in a situation.
yes,
So
yeah, yeah,
ideally, you don't want the stakes to be so high in every situation in your life where you
right.
have to like use this power.
Right, I mean, it's like money or energy or anything else. Everything is finite, and if you use it in this context, then you don't have enough later for this other context. So choose your situations wisely. And Nunchi is a very good proxy for is this situation worth it?
Mm.
Because Nunchi is energy, and if you need to use it, great. If you don't, then it's really okay to avoid certain situations. But if you're a family situation or anything where you're kind of sort of in a habitual situation and some of the people want to be there, some people don't want to be there. Um, one reason that people have cyclical arguments in a Thanksgiving situation is, well, there are several reasons. One is they have these assumptions that it's going to happen. And this is a type of prejudice. And that's why in the book I say that one of the important things about Nunchi is to abandon prejudices, which is very hard, and it doesn't just mean prejudice with respect to race and religion. It means don't go in assuming that there's going to be a fight because the other person is probably assuming that too, and then you just end up playing this role like you're being puppeteered or something. Um, and the other thing that's very important is that if there's a cyclical argument, whether it's with a family member or a loved one or a best friend, if it does, you have the same argument every 3 months and you don't know why, and it's almost scripted. It's usually because one or both parties uh, is unable or unwilling to say exactly what they're thinking. And the other person knows this and either says to them, use your words, or is thinking, I'm not a mind reader. This is exasperating. I'm in the right here because that person is not communicating. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
so,
that happens a lot.
yes, well, that's not fair because I mean, yes, it would be great if somebody said, "It really hurts me when," or whatever, blah, 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 and uses I statements and says, "Hey, I'm hungry. Let's eat," instead of saying, "Are you hungry? I'm wondering if people are hungry." I mean, it would be great if people did that, but people don't always feel comfortable expressing their feelings. Some of it might just be upbringing, and in some extreme cases, it might be if you live in an abusive household, people like that generally are very averse to ever saying exactly what's on their mind because that was punished behavior. And that can be hard to change. And you can't judge people for not being comfortable saying exactly what's on their mind. It's an extreme cultural bias to say use your words. I really hate it when people say that. Um,
So you're saying then the key is if you sense any
yeah.
tension at all,
Hmm.
and you say to yourself, "Well, he didn't or she didn't say,
Yeah.
XYZ, so I'm just gonna go on what she says." That might be wrong, Nunchi. That's using this kind of
Right.
cultural bias, which is roughly man-made, as opposed to this gut
Right.
instinct. And maybe a solution, a Nunchi solution might
Right.
be, you talk about labeling in another context,
Yeah.
but a Nunchi solution might be to label what is, given that this is high stakes, given that
Yeah.
he or she just said something, label think as an exercise, what did she actually say? Or what are the range of things she might mean?
Right. Well, that's actually no, that's a very good
Mm,
response. Yeah, and just basically looking beyond the words and thinking, okay, I mean, just very pragmatically speaking, if somebody doesn't do something differently, you'll never have a different outcome. You can't force another person to do something differently, so you have to do something differently, even if you don't think it's your responsibility. Forcing somebody to use their words is not going to work. You have to look beyond the words. Right, and that's all that Nunchi is. You might not get to the bottom of it, but, if you realize just stop being so lawyerly in your communication, and
mm.
people are very like, "Well, you said blah, blah, blah," like that was a binding agreement, or "You didn't
Oh, I love
specify."
doing that. I'm gonna have to stop doing that.
Well, only if you want people to like you. Well, that's the thing about Nunchi is that, I mean, in Korean culture, and Nunchi is an example of this, things that you do by accident are if to harm you caused by accident is almost as bad as harm that you cause on purpose. And people just recoil at this idea, of what if you have good intentions, shouldn't you be rewarded for that? I mean, yes, in the next life, maybe. I mean, if you want good person points, yes, then you get points for being a good person for having good intentions. But pragmatically speaking, no, your intentions don't matter at all. If somebody embarrasses you every time you're with them, if they annoy you, whether it's intentional or not, you just kind of don't want to be around them. And even worse for them, you're not gonna explain why. So they'll go through their whole lives with people just noticing maybe people don't like being around them, and no one will ever tell them why because they're like, "Well, it's not intentional, so I feel really bad." So it's almost worse if it's accidental harm
Right?
rather
Because you
than
have no
yeah.
way to kind of correct yourself.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting thing. Like if you ask anybody on the street, do you
Yes.
feel like you're above average with emotional intelligence? Probably 9 out of 10 will say they're above average on that. And you
Right.
refer to the Dunning-Kruger bias, which is related to this. Everyone thinks they're better than they are at
Right.
whatever. And, how do you how do you correct that? Because we all have this bias.
Uh-huh.
So how do you I guess just thinking out loud, one way
Uh-huh.
is instead of wondering where I stand in terms of Nunchi,
Uh-huh.
just trying to get better at it wherever I am.
Sure. I mean, the Dunning-Kruger so no, the Dunning-Kruger effect, for those who don't know, is the fact that people who are stupid don't know that they're stupid because they're too stupid, right?
Right. But this happens
So
like
right. Yeah.
somebody who is a painter, like
Yeah.
on these very subjective,
Right.
measures.
Right.
Someone painting, there's no objective measure if someone's a good artist or not.
Right.
Somebody might easily be fooled into thinking that they're better than they are. If someone's an
Right.
entrepreneur and they're developing their product, they might think their product's going to be a lot more exciting to people than it really will be. That's why a lot of businesses fail.
Sure, sure. Or first round American Idol auditions. Where there's they specifically pick people who are not just bad, but who think that they're really good. Because it's not funny if someone's a bad singer. It's funny if they think that they're like Pavarotti and they're a really bad singer. And it's that drop off, the discrepancy that makes people, very, doubt themselves. So I mean, Nunchi is a way of combating this, and everybody has biases. They both inflate things that they think that they think they're better than things they are, and there's also like it's like body dysmorphia, but in a more general sense, where they hyper focalize on one thing that they think is bad about themselves, and they think that everyone can see it. So all of this is what Nunchi is for. It's to sort of just focus on data collection rather than this sort of endless sort of dynamic of but then they perceive it this way, by their perception, my perception, because it's sort of like a house of mirrors or something like that.
But it's hard to
Whereas
focus on data collection, I think,
yeah.
because let's say I walk into a room and I've
Uh-huh.
been walking into a room billions of times and I have my particular way of doing things.
Yeah.
Of course, I could say, oh, I'm going to try to get the power of Nunchi here. I'm going to take a step back, observe each person,
Mhm.
observe the scenery. What is this room?
Yeah.
What's supposed to be happening here? What's
Mhm.
not? But I could still think to myself, "I did it. I did it." But I might not be really doing it. So
Right.
how do you well, this might be a good time to go
Right.
over what the rules, the 8
Yeah.
rules of Nunchi and
Sure.
talk about them and then some ways of getting better at each one. So you say, rule number 1, first, empty your mind. Lose your preconceptions in order to observe
Mhm.
with discernment. So that's hard to empty your mind because you
It's
walk
very
into a
hard.
situation with huge biases, cultural biases,
Right.
family biases, biases about each person in the room, and
Right.
so on.
Right. Yeah, it's probably the hardest thing there is to do, which is why, every single spiritual belief system requires some form of either prayer or meditation. These are all brain silencing activities. And it's probably the hardest thing that there is to do. But it's not so much that you shut it down because you can't actually shut it down. It's more that you plug your body into your environment. Your 5 by body, I mean 5 senses. So sort of surpass the cerebral cortex and go back to more instinctive, the hearing, seeing, feeling, smelling,
So trying not to judge anything happening. You give
right.
the book is so valuable because you do give like some exercises, like give some breathing exercises that help
Yeah,
kind of distract the senses
right.
a little bit. That's where you also have the idea of running cold water on your hands first before entering into a
Sure.
high stake situation because that detaches your body a little bit.
Yeah,
Uh, but uh, y- I guess you're trying to not have a gut impression at first
right,
in this case.
right. I mean, I it sounds stupid to say the brain is the enemy, but the brain is kind of the enemy. I mean, roughly speaking, we are told that there are 3 parts of the brain. There's the neocortex, which is the big part of the brain in the human. Um, and then there's the limbic brain, which is the amphibian brain, which controls emotions, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the reptilian brain, which is the most primitive brain that just is about like, survival. Um, and as humans, we devalue the older parts of the brain and we value entirely this big the cerebral cortex that gives us language and music and art and all those good things. But it is the biggest part of the brain. It is also the youngest part of the brain rather, but it thinks that it is the smartest. It's the youngest
Those
one.
kids these days.
Yeah, exactly. It's the youngest and it thinks it's the wisest. And it is and it's just it creates a lot of noise and it detaches your brain is like basically detaching your body from the room that you're in, um, which makes it impossible to read the room.
So would you
So
say data collection is not about like, okay, this person's thinking to yourself, this
right.
person's smiling, this wall is red,
Mhm,
this the speaker phone is on,
mhm.
blah blah blah. Is it more just like observing and not trying to put words to it and
Yes.
not coming up with like I could see someone following this advice and saying, "Oh, I'm gonna be like Sherlock Holmes and I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna do this, and this." Maybe not
Uh-huh.
verbalizing any conclusions
Right.
yet, and just seeing what your observation, where your observations take you automatically without c in
Right.
intellectualizing it.
No, exactly. Yeah, to just sort of you can observe without expecting immediate dramatic results. Right, you could just sort of get a sense of things. Um, you know, when at a very basic level, if you go to a funeral, you probably will sense that people are sad and you shouldn't be making jokes. I mean, everyone can do this sometimes without thinking, "Oh, I wonder what it means that that woman is crying at a funeral." Well, you can probably guess. So don't try to say, "What does this mean? What does this mean?" Just sort of take it in as a feeling first, and that's what I mean by data collection. I don't mean this, therefore, X and Y conditions are met, and therefore, uh, it must be situation Z or whatever. That's not. Yeah, it's more just taking in rather than stringing together.
Right, so
So,
again, just absorbing,
mhm,
and then it goes feeds into the second rule, which is be aware of the Nunchi Observer Effect, and you
yes,
capitalize Nunchi Observer Effect. When you enter a room, you change the room. Understand your influence. So That's like the room where everyone's talking and you enter and they
Right.
suddenly stop talking. You just change the room by your presence.
Yeah.
And it seems like the more you change the room, chances are the more high stakes this room situation, this particular situation is for you.
Yes, yes. I mean, if you walk into a room, whether people change their behavior or not, you're subtly changing the room, you know? So, like, we're sitting here, somebody came in, whether they were just, checking to see if it needed cleaning or whether they were to tell us something, it would change the atmosphere no matter what, even if they didn't say anything. So you always have to realize that you're doing that too anytime you enter a room. So you don't have to tell a joke, you don't have to make a big song and dance. I really just recommend literally standing at the threshold and, one of my I really like the tradition of the mezuzah, and I wish that everyone did that. For those who don't know, it's the scroll. It's a shema. There's a scroll that people, certain observant Jews put on their um, door frame, and that you kiss it when you go in. And you do that whether there's anyone in the room or not, right? And this is a way of honoring the room.
Hmm.
Right, and even if you're not religious, I think that the idea of kissing a mezuzah when you enter a room is a very nunchiful act. You don't have to you're not expecting God to appear in the room because you kiss the mezuzah or any kind of magic whatsoever. You don't go, "Where's my reward?" It's just a way of pausing before you enter a room as a way of honoring it and the people who are in it and the fact that it has its own soul, its own. Yeah,
And
good.
I never really thought of it that way. As opposed to
Mhm,
ritualistic, but you're
mhm,
right. It's a way of pausing
mhm.
that helps you too, in terms of like
Yeah,
just slowing you down,
yeah,
stopping your preconceptions, and
yeah.
so on. It's a pause. Um,
Yeah.
Rule number three: if you just arrived in the room, remember that everyone else has been there longer than you. Watch them to gain information. So that's important. I'm gonna just skip through and read these rules. Never pass up a good opportunity to shut up. If you wait long enough, most of your questions will be answered without you having to say a word. I love that because, for instance, in
Yeah.
negotiations, it's often very hard. Silence is often uncomfortable. It's often very hard to say something like, "Well, I want a $5 raise."
Yeah.
And then they say nothing, but then you should say nothing, like, and let them fill in the gap.
Right. I mean, you're a man of commerce, so you know this that if people who can't be silent are it's a huge handicap, right? Because if um I know somebody who negotiated a raise uh and did it entirely by not saying anything, which the boss was not prepared for at all because the boss had this script in her mind about like, okay, he's gonna say this and I'm gonna say, but you just started, and then he's gonna say this and I'm gonna say that. The one thing the boss was not prepared for was the guy saying nothing. He just said, I would like a raise, and so the boss didn't really know what to do, and she kept babbling and saying, okay, well, is this about the cost of living increase that everyone got because you started in the 4th quarter and then he was like, "Whoa, I didn't know there was a cost of living increase, but okay, thanks." And the conversation kept going like that. The boss could not be quiet and kept showing her hand and kept showing her hand and accidentally revealed how much this person's manager was making in the course of explaining why she couldn't give this much of a raise and basically accidentally gave the exact range that the person could ask for. And people do this all the time, whether you're buying a house or whatever. Um, if you talk too much, you will reveal your whole hand. And the same thing with interviewing for a job. And people always, or a first date, people always think they want to show how great they are. And they forget that the other person's basically giving them, like, again, if you let the other person talk, it's like they're going to show you the answers to the test. You don't have to really talk as much as you think you need to.
It's so interesting. Like in real estate, people there's the kind of cliche scene in a movie where somebody thinks they're a good negotiator in real estate, and they say, "Well, the faucet is a little leaky, and the view not so." Like the customer is
Right.
talking too much, whereas the real estate agent's only goal really is to sell the house. Yeah,
Right.
he gets his commission. It's not that much different, no matter what the price is.
Yeah.
So you kind of just want to say, well, you kind of just want to leave it open ended. Well, what do you suggest
Yeah.
here? And let them talk and be quiet throughout.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. I mean, and we know this, but in the moment, it's very hard to be quiet. That's why people are addicted to their phones because it's just a socially acceptable way of shutting people out that we've been waiting for, or and finally we have an invention that allows us to do this in a way that's considered okay.
I agree with you. Like one time I was at a restaurant and I saw
Mhm,
a table filled with like
mhm,
12 or more kids,
mhm.
kids being like teenagers or people in their young 20s.
Right.
And every now and then, at any given point, two or three of the kids would just be like withdrawn a little and looking at their phone. I actually think that's a great thing. Like some people don't want to be in a intense conversation with 12 people for 4 straight hours. Let them take breaks sometimes, look at their phone. It's not such a bad thing.
Well, I mean, you could take a break, but, you could also I mean, how is looking at your phone taking a break?
Well, taking a break from that situation, it's like
Oh, I see what you're saying.
escapism.
Well, sure. I mean, but, I mean, obviously, if you're in a situation that you don't wanna be, that's fine, but, why are people checking their phones while crossing the street,
Oh, yeah, that's
you
a good
know?
point.
Or, I mean,
Because they wanna die?
well, according to Freud, we all wanna die. We're born wanting to die, so it
So
could be that, but
so, you talked about if you cause harm unintentionally, it sometimes is bad. Read between the lines, we talked about that. We talked about be nimble, be quick.
yeah.
Just as a quick summary, this is on page 78 of the Power of Nunchi, that, by you. Uh, and you give at the end of the book too, I wanna recommend you give some games, like the Nunchi game and this
Yes.
other game that I think are really great for practicing Nunchi, and I've seen some other versions of these games that really rely on people's ability to read others.
Yeah.
But what are some and then we'll have to wrap it up. I wanna be respectful of your time, but what are some very, like, quick ways to immediately practice Nunchi? I wanna practice Nunchi, like, in the next half hour.
Um, Poker?
Yeah? And I noticed you by the way, you quote our very
Yeah.
good friend, Maria Konnikova in
Oh, I
here,
love
who's
her.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she's written about Sherlock Holmes, which you mentioned in the
Yes.
book, and she's also writing about poker now,
Yeah.
and she has a lot of what I've never seen her say what you mentioned in your book that I thought it was fascinating to not look at the obvious things that everyone else looks at, but look at the other things that people aren't looking at. Uh,
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's what, because Maria Konnikova is a professional poker player, and she says everyone thinks that they know how to tell. I mean, I mean, everyone has a tell, but it's not what you think it is basically what she's saying. And that ties into what I'm saying about Nunchi, which is abandon your prejudices. Don't assume that, you know, if somebody is playing with their ear that it means this, because okay, I mean, that that won't get you very far. It's not about specific things. It's not about what you're prejudiced to assume are signs. It's about paying attention to the whole person, no, sorry, the whole table actually, the whole room. Like when you go to I mean, I like to compare if you want to do a Nunchi exercise, pretend that you're watching a play instead of just talking to a person. If you're watching a play, you don't just focus on one or two people. You look
mm.
at the whole stage. Otherwise, you're losing context, right? And do the same thing when you enter a room. I mean, as Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage, and the men and women are merely players. And that's basically that's what he was saying is that everyone is there for a reason. Take in the whole stage. And same with poker. You don't just watch what one person is doing. You watch what everyone is doing. It's a dynamic.
Well, also you make an interesting point, like,
Uh,
a lot of times again, a lot of these things have to do with cliches about
yes.
situations and environments. So you mentioned they tugging their ear, or in the
Mhm.
movie about
Mhm.
poker, Rounders, like he messes with an Oreo cookie every time he's bluffing.
Right.
Sometimes a tell is not a specific action.
Right.
It goes back to what you were saying with the reptilian brain.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you are really paying attention and observe a lot,
Right.
you can't put a word to the tell, but you just
Right.
feel, I feel like he doesn't have as good a hand as he's
Right.
representing. Now, what you also talk in the book a little bit, and this will be the final question, but you talk in the book about we sometimes we should trust our first or gut
Yeah.
impressions.
Mhm.
Uh, when but and yet, like everybody thinks they're a good judge of character, and everybody thinks they have good
Yes.
first impressions. I don't think that about myself. I think I have often very poor impressions, particularly in high stakes situations. So when should you know to trust your first impression?
Right, well, this is sort of the dilemma because on the one hand, I mean, the gut is called the second brain for a reason. And Deepak Chopra says something that I really love, which is the body is very intelligent. And to me, that's exactly I think that's true, and a lot of people downplay that. On the other hand, people say, "Well, I followed my gut, and look what happened." Well, I mean, I think people are confusing different parts of their body. You know, um, if you like I said, the cerebral cortex is what confuses people, makes them make huge mistakes. It's the thing that creates prejudice, uh, not just general prejudice, and also um, systemic prejudice. That does, that comes from overthinking things and making associations that aren't real. Uh, because the human brain has a tendency to think in a previous situation X led to Y. Therefore, in all situations X leads to Y. That's not a reptilian instinct. That's a cerebral cortex instinct. And these desires and um, readings come from different parts of the body. And I think that if you're getting a feeling that comes from your gut and it is a correct feeling, it feels different in the body. It feels cold and hard, like a fact, whether it's great news or bad news. Like if you think about like when I found out like a cousin of mine had died, you know, it just felt like a fact, whereas something that your cerebral cortex is jumping on will feel hot. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is that my phone?
That's okay.
Can,
No, so
can you edit that out or get me I'll start over.
that's okay.
You to press
We
dismiss.
we don't edit out
Oh
mistakes, so
no,
that's
okay.
fine.
I'm
Your phone did not read the room correctly.
I'm so sorry. What I was saying was, it comes. Instincts come from different parts of the body, and anything that's from the gut that is correct will feel cold
But
and hard.
like
Yeah. So.
let's say you're
Mhm.
thinking of doing business with somebody,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
let's say they have some form of Asperger's.
Mhm.
So as opposed to the conversations you have with
Yeah.
almost everyone else, the conversations with this person feels a little awkward. Like you're not quite sure where you stand in the conversation, so you feel bad about.
Right.
My gut might be don't do business with this person, and yet they might be very good at what they do. It's just I misread their Asperger's somehow.
Oh, I see.
I'm taking an extreme
Right.
example.
So you mean you feel bad because they just leave you with a bad feeling about working with them or something like
Yeah, like I
that?
think the communication wasn't like a normal
Oh,
communication.
oh, yeah, again, I would say, well, if the communication isn't good, then you probably shouldn't do business with them. But if you just mean, like, is your bad feeling enough to dismiss somebody?
I guess, yeah,
Mhm,
there's probably
right,
even nuances in that you
yeah,
could practice paying attention to.
right,
I mean, I wonder if you think this is
right,
a good exercise, like, just with each person you meet
yeah,
today, try to come up with some gut assumptions and
yeah.
see if they're correct somehow. I don't know how you test if they're correct, but try and, you know, practice that more and more might be a good technique.
Um, gotta s well, I mean, I guess I would do it in a context where you have more than one interaction with them, yes, like in a room. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do it with people that you run into on the street or a
Yes.
clerk or something, but yeah, I mean, next time you're in a very I would practice in a very ordinary situation before a high stakes one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, Euny Hong, author of The Power of Nunchi. It's so interesting because I do feel like this is emotional intelligence squared because it's not just about like, oh, what do I do when she says this? What do I do when he says this?
Right.
It's more about like the whole room, the
Yes.
context, the energy of the room, your health, because you probably have to be healthy and creative and so on
Yeah.
to be able to do these techniques. You also wrote The Birth of Korean Cool, which I think is a fascinating topic too, which we'll have to talk about at another
Yes.
time.
I
The
love
idea
that.
that um, somehow South Korea went from nothing to being the coolest country in the world. K-pop is huge all
Right.
over the world, and I just read that South Koreans have more photos saved on their phone by far than any other country. And I was curious if that was related, but we will save that for the next. We'll have you on again. I'll say that for the next time. But
Yeah.
I strongly recommend people read The Power of Nunchi and
Thank
understand
you.
the concept of to basically pause when entering into a situation, be quiet, observe, practice letting that reptilian mind, help you form your instincts and don't assume you have good emotional intelligence. Like always remind yourself that you probably don't have as good as you think. So thanks so much, Uni, for coming on the
Thank
podcast.
you. It was really fun. Thank
My
you.
my nunchi here is that you would like to stay on the podcast longer, but I know you have your next thing to go to. So
That is a good read. Thank you.
thanks so much.
Bye.